Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Nested Healing Podcast. I'm your host, Jess. Today's episode, we're going to be talking about how collective humanity, society, and environment impacts an individual, especially through the eyes and lens of trauma, and how human resilience exists. Today, I'd like to welcome our three wonderful, amazing guests. Let's start with Jessica Samples. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you. Um, I think I'll start off by sharing that like so many people, live with trauma um, yeah, and just saying that here, we're getting to know each other here. I can sense the interruption in my state of flow that I was in earlier. So just noticing that, and as a mindfulness practitioner, just being present and being here with all of you and your question and our big topic with some noticing on how my body and my system is responding. So I'm taking a breath. And then I'll share that my work in the world is, and my training is in mindfulness and meditation, and I work with groups as the founder of Co-Create Calm to uh, nurture spaces for self-healing in the collective. And I'll talk more about that later, but very happy to be here and spending time with you all.
So thank you so much. Next we have Shada Kapai.
Hi, everyone. My name is Shada. My pronouns are she, her. I'm an associate professor at Cal Poly Pomona in the Ethnic and Women's Studies Department. I come to this conversation as a disabled educator and writer, as a mad disabled educator and writer. Mad being a more politicized term for mental illness or someone who suffers from mental illness. And I too come holding a lineage and a history of trauma that I'm excited to put in a larger framing of things that maybe we've talked about in our education spaces, but also in a very personal way. And so I'm just really thrilled to be here and to be in community with all of you.
Thank you so much for being here. And last but not least, the wonderful Cynthia Luna.
Thank you, Jess. Such a pleasure to join you here. I'm actually not far from Cal Poly Pomona. I'm in Claremont, California, the land of Kish Toibinga people, and which holds a lot of already collective historical trauma. I also like saying it was Mexico at some point. And anyway, so I stand on a lot of history here. I'm originally from Mexico City, so I bring that ancestral line as well. And I do a lot of collective work in different ways. I have an organization that focuses on leadership development. So I work within organizations with teams and groups working on leadership. And through that, a lot of collective stuff that comes through. I'm also lead teacher with New Ventures West, which is a coaching school. And we'll start talking at some point how individual is not separate from collective. So I bring a lot of that into that work in the world of coaching. And then lastly, I'm part of the work of Thomas Hubel. I assist in some of his work, and he's dedicated to doing collective healing. So this is my favorite topic. I love immersing myself in it, whether I call it work or life or what it is, but I feel that that's one of the reasons why I'm here on this earth. So I'm really happy to share space with you and see what we discover together today.
Thank you all for being here and thank you all for having this conversation. I wanted to kind of start our our conversation with a question. Um, I believe it was how does the environment impact trauma or the individual? How does human resilience come into play from your guys' understanding and standpoint and wisdom?
You know, when you ask this, I think immediately first, like, what's the environment? And coming from somebody who's located in the 21st century in the US, I'm thinking of environment as places that have a lot of power and discipline and regulation on our body minds as people. So your question first made me think about what is the environment, and I was thinking about our family systems as being critical sources, educational systems, political systems, religious systems. So my mind first went to like, what are the environments that regulate and discipline us in different ways from which we are rooted, and also that inform us. And I was also thinking about how in these large structures of power that are also our environments, there are moments of forced disappearance where we are told to make ourselves small. So those were some of like the opening initial things that were coming to mind in this question of environment.
As I heard your question, Jess, I was also thinking about the systems around us that impact the individual. And I was thinking about what happens to the individual. And I'm thinking about primarily what resources we don't have access to when systems are pressing down on us. And I'm thinking about the nervous system being agitated and not having access to the rational mind, to our other ways of knowing, to our body and heart knowing and wisdom, our lived experience, and the body. And so I think that we lose individually and collectively so much wisdom and power when we're being pressed by our environment. And I think that every time one of those sources are pinched, I would call that a version of trauma or a result.
Interesting question, Jess, because as soon as you ask it, my initial response felt, well, everything is environment. We are the environment is not outside of us. The environment, we are the environment, and because we are the environment, it's nothing is separate, meaning it's all collective. So I really feel, even, as we're coming here together to have a conversation, what's arising in the conversation as we're all talking is not, we are co-creating, this is what I'm feeling, we're co-creating an environment. And I think part of the challenge is that we have a misunderstanding about that we are separate from environments, right? That we can, that the decisions that I make are not impacting others in the environment. And I'm also sensitive to, it's not just the human world but the animal world, the plant world, the universe world. Um, so that's that's the first thing that comes up. Like, what are we talking about environment? And then how this misunderstanding that we can make decisions at an individual level, even when we're trying to make good decisions for influencing positively the environment in certain situations. When we miss the collective part of it, we're really not speaking from the environment from which the change actually happens. And sometimes the most assertive action or the most influential action is the environment that we can shift within ourselves, right? That's part of what also you bring in the work that you guys are already mentioning. So yeah, so that has me quite intrigued. And it doesn't mean that we don't influence environments, the pressure of environments, but I think the conversation has to shift, versus this and that, more towards we space. How are we living organisms that are not separate from one another, and whatever happens here has impact everywhere. So that's what came up for me.
I really appreciate what you both are sharing, and I keep coming back to Jessica, you said the word pinch. I keep coming back to this idea and the systemic pushes against our body minds that are causing the pinch. In one of our classes, I think just the class that you're in, we are reading a book by Tricia Hersey named Rest is Resistance, and she's talking about the importance of acknowledging, one, that there's a racialized sleep gap in the United States, and that the idea of rest can push against not just white supremacy, but capitalism, and how capitalism mechanizes our bodies and individualizes us and resists this idea of the truth of collectivity and interdependence. And so as I'm thinking about the pinch, I'm also thinking about how the pinch results in a perpetual individualization and independence mythology, but also how the pinch mechanizes our bodies and really distances us from these conversations of like rooted in community, rooted in somatics. So I'm thinking about this word and this image that you offered. And then also, Cynthia, this offering of collectivity being at the root of our work and our movement building. But I'm reflecting in real time, and I'm struck by these offerings.
I really, really love and resonate with you of, amplifying what Jessica, you just mentioned about the pinch. And so it's just like, just feeling the pinch here. And how, in a way, all this, what we can call oppression movements, in whatever way we can, unpack it. But, whatever pressures in for the pinch to appear is in itself a trauma, it's a trauma shock that has us, at least in my experience, it separates us from our humanity, right? It's like it's a shock that then we have to cope collectively. So, and part of the crazy making of the shock is that we feel isolated in it. But when we start conversations like this, turning towards community, we realize that, oh, it's a collective pinch. So that feels so incredibly precise, that wording. And yeah.
I want to add a little more to pinch, the pain, there's pain there. And it's also the pinching off of the flow of the resources that we all have to really contribute to a world that's different than the one that we're living. If pinching off a vein robs the body and organs of oxygen and stops flow. Jess, you all also had the word resilience in your question. Are you open to sharing a little bit more about what's underneath bringing that word into right now, what you were thinking?
Yeah. In my mind, the words trauma and resilience almost coexist with each other. Because I feel like we're the word trauma is not necessarily stigmatized, but it's a word that carries a lot of weight. Um, and really, to me, what trauma represents is things that impact humans that cause us to become resilient. Um, there's different ways, obviously, of healing from the trauma or learning to live with the outer effects that is given to us. But the core of humans and human spirit is resilience to me. Um, we create, like we've mentioned these before, all of these systemic conduits, I would say, almost of like that continuously beat down on specific groups or people as a whole, us communities, as creatures, as collectives. And what keeps us going, what keeps us flowing like a river around stones that have been thrown in it is resilience, right? And that's kind of why I bring that up and why I bring up this human nature is resilience. We are able to create new solutions that begin no, that's not the word I'm looking for. I can't remember the word exactly, but that go around these shame building, I would say, infrastructures we create to create cookie cutter molds that don't necessarily work unless you're in a certain social class or a certain type of person or something similar.
I love that you bring the metaphor of a river, because it's like I can feel, as you're bringing resilience in and that metaphor, I can feel like, well, life wants to leave, so that's part of the force of life, the source of life that, we keep adjusting, adapting, evolving. And so that's what comes to me, and that life that wants to leave, it's not just in this lifetime, but it has a force that comes from the beginning of time, that gets passed from generation after generation after generation after generation of survival, adaptation, and resilience. And we are here. And so I feel a beautiful metaphor you just brought in and made me feel into the river of life and how life wants to live. And so, and we're the result of that. It's beautiful.
I also appreciated the metaphor, and I'm noticing that I have some level of resistance around the term resilience. I'm thinking about, which we were talking before we started recording, the pressure on the individual to be resilient, to own all that it takes and all the labor in order to survive. And I don't personally equate survival with resilience. And I think if we think about all of us collectively having the pinch released, living in that world, to me, that would be different than survival. That would be resilience, actually having access to our birthright. So I'll put that out there to folks.
I appreciate that opening because I wrote resilience and I crossed it out and wrote community sustainability. Coming from disability community, but also somebody who does math studies and disability studies work, resilience in some degree is so linked to ableism for me. Sanism, and like our goal is to overcome our body minds. And I think given that those things are so connected to power and disconnect us from our own internal power, I'm thinking about how resilience, on the one hand, like you were sharing, is perpetuating a myth of independence, but also how perhaps the wisdom is in our communities. And perhaps the wisdom is in the sustainability work that a lot of movement building frameworks like healing justice and disability justice are pushing towards. So movement building frameworks that are rooted in work by people of color, queer, trans people of color, disabled people of color. And I don't know if I can articulate it any clearer, but there is something that moves in my gut around that word and the narrative or the assumption that we must overcome our body minds in a way that doesn't acknowledge the larger systemic structures that are pressing down against us, and to go back to the metaphor, pinching us. Yeah, some things that are coming to mind. But there's something in my gut that feels uncertain and uncomfortable around the concept and how for me, it feels like I'm moving away from community in this word. And I need to keep thinking on it. So I'm really grateful that we're having this conversation.
I really love the new framing you brought in. Can you repeat that? Community something.
Yeah, community and sustainability. Also the word collective liberation. These are all principles of disability justice. It's kind of the second wave of the disability rights movement. And so, and I can definitely just like share links about all of this with folks, but the idea is that we are going to move in a way that leaves nobody behind. And we are going to move in ways that are anti-capitalist, in ways that are intersectional, and in ways that ensure our collective liberation. Coming from the wisdom of disabled, trans, queer people of color.
I love this. And when you say collective liberation, I can feel the underlying current around really collective healing.
Yes.
Because without healing, there's no liberation, really. And so, yeah, I love that. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah, of course.
You're sparking inside of me just the need to say out loud, which we've all presumably experienced in different ways, is that the pinch isn't distributed equally among identities in our society. And so when we're thinking about the word resilience and who we're saying life wants to be lived, and it's true, life does tumble forward. And for some of us, individual, collective, the pinch is so hard life ends or life is ended. And so I am interested in like finding a collective definition for resilience that is different than survival.
And I wonder if there's a reimagining of it. Because, I feel that, the word in itself has a political charge in it. that, it makes me want to look at the etymology, and all of that. I don't know, but I can feel the church in the moment you name it, in the context, in the environment, in the US, right? So, me coming from Mexico, it, I don't, anyway, it's a different, it has a different weight. And maybe there are some words that are so charged that it's okay to let them rest. You know, we don't have to force them. Maybe we're moving more towards collective liberation, which in itself, I think it has a lot more precision in what you guys are naming of what we're all talking about, moving from the individual to the collective, and how we are all responsible for everybody, right? That, ability is not a problem just for people who, have challenges, or, whatever, or that language is not just for the few, or that, all these things. I think that I feel really called to, like, what does like true collective solidarity and evolution is, and what needs to change within ourselves to be able to relate to our lives in that way, when we have systems that force the separation, that keep reinforcing this, what you're talking about, the pinch, that of course for some, on different categories, um is life killing, not life giving, right?
Mm, I'm thinking to your question, and I love this idea of maybe some concepts need to rest and need to be left and restructured. But I'm thinking one way into your question is for us to consider what is normal, what is the violence of normal, what does normal look like in terms of a person, what are the structures in place that reinforce normalcy. I feel like that might be one way in to see what are the ways in which normal has been reified in really large ways, and then in really, really small ways in terms of media, movies. I just wonder if this idea of normal is something that is like hovering or haunting this conversation of trauma, and the systemic structures of power that replicate, especially for intersectional and multiply marginalized communities, the pinch. I feel like normal is this specter that haunts us on a daily basis, that haunts me on a daily basis as a queer femme of color, as a disabled person. It travels with me into the classroom. It creates trauma in different spaces in which I work. So yeah, I'm in listening to you sharing this, my mind keeps coming back to the ways in which normal consumes us, reduces us, literally eradicates, and kills. So I'm thinking of normal in terms of like metaphor, but real tangible impact on our lives and on our bodies.
And on our souls.
Absolutely.
It's the ultimate oppression.
Absolutely. I really appreciate how you phrased that. And then perhaps too, the intergenerationalness of that trauma and the lineage that's passed down.
Yeah. And I feel like everybody loses in this, what Gabor Mate calls the myth of normal. We all lose to different degrees, of course, but we all lose. It's part of the dehumanization and the objectification. Yeah, I appreciate that. It really saddens me, as we're talking about it, to feel into it.
I was sharing before we started that I saw I listened to a talk on YouTube with Bell Hooks last week, and she was talking about how in our culture of domination, we're taught that power is always over us or outside of us, and that it can never be. Because of colonization, we're taught, and because of white supremacy, people of color especially are taught that they are powerless, like their powerlessness is internalized. And I'm thinking of that here too. I'm thinking of it in terms of the normalization of power being over us, as opposed to power being something intrinsic within us that we can engage with. That we can grow and build community and solidarity with. So I'm thinking about that feeling of this mobilizing agent being taken from us and what that feels like, practically, spiritually. We feel disempowered all the time, to have that disempowerment reinforced all the time. And then too, like my next question about that is like, okay, but how do we move through or move past or reclaim?
And to your point, what's the intergenerational healing that needs to happen? So we're not just pushing through, right? Which is where, what you were bringing, Jessica, from Brazilians, right? Like we just push through. It's not it. It's just like what's true liberation.
Yeah. What's true liberation, and what's our responsibility, personal, collectively, and what is the next step? I think it's important to be dreaming and visioning and calling in collective liberation. And what do we do with our days and lives and people we're in community with? You were mentioning the Bell Hooks interview that you were listening to, and that it also held the question, how do we hold the tension between putting pressure or inviting or asking or telling the individual to relieve, to bring in some stress reduction, to resilience tools, when it is the environment and deeply, deeply unequally distributed pressure and pinches. Like how do we hold that in our work and our hearts and bodies? And that's a question I'm in a lot these days with my work in the world. Curious how you begin to think about that.
I keep feeling with this, both I'll say it this way. I keep feeling the tension between the clearing of the veils of powerlessness and of disconnection, that it does make me feel more alive and more, just as an extension of nature where everybody has its parts and all of that. I really, really feel it. And then on the other hand, I can feel the pressure of, we can just name it. I don't know if we can name it without, too much aggregate attention, but the political environment we're in the middle of, where you can see how money is clearly making decisions for all of us, right? So what do you do with that? And so I don't have a response to your question. I just feel like the tension right in the center of my chest between what's possible as the veils open, and what feels sometimes impossible in the current structures of the world that have been systemically reinforced generation after generation. And the only hope that I can feel is when we come together in community and we can explore not only what we know, but where we're actually stuck together. Yeah, there's something about that in itself feels powerful. And I keep feeling this word solidarity, not in a, over layer, but in a deeper, under the ground kind of layer.
Maybe that's not the answer, but an answer. The holding of spaces like this where we name the problem. And I think the naming, and this isn't my idea, this is an amazing queer of color feminist, Killjoy. Her name is Sarah Ahmed. And she says that we must name the problem to alert that the problem still exists. And I think this is one way of moving toward the creation of kinship networks, solidarity networks. But this is one way to invite, and I don't know what the verb is, it just left me. But I think part of the work is holding spaces like this where we can name the problem. I think just acknowledging that it is and it exists denaturalizes that it's something that we don't question. It's just the way things are. So I think just us having this conversation in this space and other spaces denaturalizes the power and the impact and lineages of trauma that we experience and that we are globally right now witnessing with multiple genocides.
I see that in my practice where I work with groups of people who are parenting kids from babies through the teens, different caregivers who, in my case, in my work, who are identified as women or feel comfortable and supported in a space that centers motherhood expansively defined. And I see some measure of softening in our small groups where it is named, that it's affirmed, and it's not a personal problem or a personal lack of resilience or something that we individually are doing wrong, but really naming the systems and seeing each other in group as we do it. And then the whole, hour every week being held in what Paul Condon, a professor at I think, Southern Oregon University, calls the field of care. So bringing in presence and mindfulness and really steeping in a field of care where we're naming and we're seeing each other, witnessing, the other, but with new compassionate eyes because of seeing our similarities in a way that is mindfulness, that is mindful. I see personally, day after day, something shifting. And I still hold the question of, like, And now what, or what else can I be doing? Because I'm a little bit further down the road, through good fortune and work in my own healing journey. So I'm like looking up, okay, now I have some energy, freed up energy after, I mean, healing, I think, is a lifelong journey for sure. And Prentice Hemphill's new book says that so beautifully, that healing is an orientation to life, not an end point. And as my capacity is growing to soothe myself and to be, a larger witness, I'm in question, like, where do I act next? Like, what is my personal next step? How does that involve, or does it involve the people who I'm working with?
I deeply, just as I'm sitting with what you've shared, I realized like, oh, I really, I have this trust in life for guidance, which doesn't mean inaction, but it means what kind of deep listening can we do to know just the next step, and then the next step, and then the next step, and can we so two things are coming at the same time is, can we truly trust life to guide us, and can we do it together? Like, how do we create collective practices like some of what you're naming? How can we create collective practices so that our collective walking in response of life's guidance can truly shift things? Because it takes, in my perspective, collective healing takes the collective. I'm often in collective spaces where the leaders burn out as part of my supportive work, and I don't think that's healing. I don't think that's really true response to life. But what's a different way when we can learn to walk together? I think that's, and then have enough practices like what you bring, Jessica, so that we can actually listen and trust the next step and the next step and the next step. And I think it's hard when we are responding from the urgency of trauma. It's hard to hear.
I've heard from, well, several of the movement organizers, the founders of the Black Lives Matter movement have shared their burnout. Erica Woodland and Kara Page from the Healing Justice Lineages book have shared their burnout. I shared my burnout with my students, my burnout last year. I know for myself, and I don't know if this is true for everybody, but something that I've been really thinking about lately is how trauma and systemic oppressions really distance us from need, our own need as human beings. And I think ableism is a big part of this as well, but I found it very difficult to say, I need rest. I need to slow down. And of course, we've been conditioned in capitalism that our worth is contingent on what we produce, right? And how fast we do it and how effectively we do it. And this is true in academia for sure. But I'm starting to realize after a lot of therapy and rest this summer, which comes with a lot of privilege to be able to say that I was able to take this space, right? That one of the things that can help me understand how we can get toward collective liberation and sustainability and collectivity is really centering and not shaming our needs. Folks that I've read in disability studies literature, but also in disability justice movement work, one of the things is trying to say and acknowledge that our needs don't make us less human or less incredible or brilliant. Our needs are things that we can share without shame and without stigma. And it's a very difficult process, but I think destigmatizing need is one way we can get there, or at least get toward it. Arrive closer to it, perhaps.
I've been thinking lately that somebody must have written about this, but you know how the word restoration has the word rest in it, right? And then you know, because my mother language is Spanish, I always read it as, you know, oración, rest, oración, like a prayer for rest. And that has been really steering within me around, oh, all this work that those of us who are engaged in this kind of healing work are trying to do is the restoration of the collective soul. At least that's how I call it. The restoration of the collective soul. That has a couple of meanings, right? Of course, the restoration from what its original purpose and its original sacred contract of the humankind, but also that true restoration is a prayer for rest. That when we all can rest, not just a few, but when we can all rest, we've been restored. Right? You see that in the land. Land that is able to rest flourishes. No effort needed. So I'm wondering, how can this prayer for rest can come forth more and more everywhere? And I would say, you know, at every layer of society. I think we have an endemic restlessness that keeps separating us from who we are, or who we're meant to be. Another response from trauma, of course.
Yeah. I think if you haven't yet, you would love Rest as Resistance, because for her, she's documenting her, well, one, why she needed rest, and it was because of her burnout and exhaustion in graduate school. But also she kind of pulls the lens back to say, and to see how restlessness and the sleep gap goes back as far as slavery and colonization in the US, and what are the small modalities and the large modalities of intervention that people can do at all stages. And it could be sleep and a nap, but it could be other restorative practices that lend from mindfulness and other things, and really how rest is our divine right and maybe a powerful way to intervene in the cyclicalness of trauma that I find myself in, we find ourselves in.
Beautiful. I love this. Rest is our divine right.
That's a direct quote from Tricia Hersey.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's phenomenal.
Okay.
I want to share, like, I want to get your thoughts on something. The one word that kind of reappears in my head over and over and over again is the word rebellion. In some way or another, most of the time when we're talking about these things, we're talking about rebellion in some way or form, rebelling against normative fashions, normative ways of societal things and everything. And I think for me, I've been thinking about the word resilience and what that is. And that's not the word I should have picked. I think for me, that's not what I meant. I meant the word rebellion. And I think for me, I'm kind of redefining that in my head a little bit.
I love that renaming, that reframing of rebellion. I think my understanding of rebellion comes from my communities. I think that my ability to rebel in different ways, and when I say rebel, I mean the very and I'll be honest about this. Some things that I'm working on right now are unlearning perfectionism and people pleasing in particular. They were survival practices, but things that aren't serving me anymore. And I think my ability to rebel against these trauma responses in many ways has only come to me because of community and solidarity with other folks that are doing this labor. So I think about your offering of rebellion as very much living in a larger container of collectivity and community. So those are some things that I immediately saw when you offered this word to us.
So because English is not my first language, my mind does funny things with words. So, when you name rebellion, I started thinking, oh, like, I don't know if even this is a word, but what came up is, reveling in something. Is that a word? Like, like reveling, like something that gives you pleasure. Yes, am I speaking English? Okay, good. Right? So it's like when we think about rebellion, it's what we rebel against in a way, right? What's the resistance? And when I started feeling into reveling, like what are we rebelling for? Like what's the life force that is coming through that we're voting for with our actions? And that feels to me really incredibly life-giving and pleasurable and not burnt out like, but more like, I already said life-giving, like, oh, what do I rebel? What do I relish in life that I want to live with that? And whoever is with me, let's go do it. So that's what came up. Yeah.
Jess, I have a question for you if you're open to it.
Sure. Go ahead.
What does it feel like to have said a word and put something out, gotten response in our small collective here, and then watched the shift and a birth of a new way to describe what you were wondering about?
I think what goes through is it's like I want to say it's like a couple motions. It's like first I'm like, what I meant had good intention, obviously, and being refrained at the point of being like, oh, but how it comes across is different, and understanding and taking that in and processing that, and being like, well, maybe this good intention doesn't always come out as a good intention. It can block other people, it can block other things. Then comes the question of what is the word I really am searching for? And then I just kind of sat and I listened and I took in all of your wise words of wisdom and came to the word of no, I mean to rebel. Because for me, rebellion is as much it is a hard word as it is a soft word in the way that it has many facets, from like literally revolution, to even just like it's 5 o'clock. I don't want someone's texted me from work. My phone is off. This isn't up. Not this is not work hours. They don't rule my life. I'm rebelling against a normative capital, capital, capitalism, and all of those type of things. So for me, it was just searching for the word to describe what I meant in a way that would be non-harmful, in a way that is more community based almost.
You know what's really interesting? You're making me think, Jess, about how, and I said it earlier, like I can't quite name my discomfort or the friction I'm feeling with this word resilience, but your comment made me think about how it made me think of an answer. Resilient makes me think of I'm resilient in systemic structures that are oppressive. I'm surviving in the structures. Like I'm housed in the structures and I'm living in the structures and I'm making it. But rebellion says there's something wrong with the structure. Let me change it. And that action, like that point of action, that's why I get really uncomfortable with resilience, because it's like I'm surviving in the systems. I'm not changing the systems. I'm not disrupting the systems. Versus rebellion, which is there is something wrong with the systems. We need to start with something different. We need to challenge. We need to change. We need to revise. And so the passivity of resilience is the problem I have with the word. Yeah, so thank you for helping me get there.
Ooh, thank you for helping me read my mind and like figure out a way to be like, more inclusive in my language. I feel like personally that's what I lack the most. I think my intent is always to be inclusive as much as possible. But for me, my language doesn't always get there.
Same. And I think that's like the beauty of, again, like community and like brainstorming and processing together. I can't tell you all, I came to this space with so much anxiety. I have anxiety anyway, but entering into a new space, I always have anxiety. And I feel so rooted and nourished right now in your company and in processing together. So this has just been, thank you.
Jess, I want to also say me too. I mean, all of us, just like healing isn't a definition, we're all learning and growing together. I mean, literally in real time. And I think it takes a lot of courage to reflect on your process just now, and you doing that and then surfacing the word rebellion gave me a gift. And I'm also feeling very nurtured and free to explore. And you offered a gift for me with that word, and holding my I'm going to do sacrifice in quotes, because it is small sacrifice and there is a pinch, so holding both. Um, and really reclaiming as an act, and saying out loud here, where I'm presumably one other person will be listening. I'm really standing proud in my decisions to prioritize my my well-being, our precious hours in the day, and how we want to interact, with capitalism, and really hearing the word rebel, I'm like standing taller and feel like giving voice to it and saying it publicly. Like I wouldn't have been able to do that. I've never really done it before without you like making the way. So deep thanks, Jess, really.
Friend of mine reminded me recently that thoughts really don't belong to anybody. They are in the collective field and they find their way through different voices and different bodies. And so, with that, it's like, there's no mistakes. Yeah, we're all finding our way through the collective field so that we can feel it a little bit more closer in. And we need each other for that. one person cannot do it alone because we just have a tiny particle of it. So I live in a world where I hope is filled with not right expressions, because that in itself is for me more aligned with life itself trying to come through all of us and share space. So that's what's coming up for me. And the other thing, when you express just good intention, something that touches in my heart is the original good intention of human life. That a lot of these systems that have created these strong pinches in many parts of society, that we can trace its origin to a feeling of a scarcity in some way that started disconnecting us from being of the earth. And so it had a good intention originally to care for each other, to care for ourselves. And then it multiplied in all kinds of collective trauma. But there's something around, like, as you spoke about your good intention, it's like, it helped me feel the goodness, the goodness that's behind in the origin of the harm.
Thank you
know.
all.
Yeah, I don't know what that does, but there's something there for me.
I feel like I get what you're getting at. I see you where you are. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you all for being here. Thank you all for your wise words of wisdom. About 5 minutes left. I feel like a quick wrap up question would be like, what are your favorite, what are your highlights? Let's do a quick highlights rule, I guess, of this conversation. Where are you pulling most, you feel like, in terms of I guess gratitude, if that makes sense. I could rephrase.
The word that comes up for me is communion. Like what does community healing, restoration, liberation, like what's the seed of that, and experiencing our communion here and how that in itself restores the space that we share, and how that feels in my own system. Yeah, I feel deeply grateful for for the organizing of the space, for what everybody shared, and for the restoration that I feel in my own system through it.
I can share next. I am really grateful for our processing, searching for language, finding language, pulling language apart. My background is in English and poetry. And so, like, when I hear words like pinch, or like Cynthia, your offering of restoration has rest. I mean, these are all the nerdy things that I wrote down in my journal, like listening to you all. These are the things that bring me joy. And the reveling idea too. So I feel excited. I feel potential. I am really grateful to yeah, come from a place of anxiety and unsureness to a place of potential and excitement because of our time together. So I'm really grateful to you, Jessica and Cynthia and Jess and your whole team for just bringing everybody together. And because we were talking about care, y'all put so much care into the process of like us actually arriving here, which doesn't happen often. So just feeling a lot of gratitude for everybody.
I am feeling I'm feeling gratitude for all of the individuals here and the people behind the scenes and the people in all our lives who made it possible for us to be in a space that where we could hear each other. And just savoring the good that has been here, the kindness, the curiosity. I mean, it feels like this hour has been a rebellion in a certain way, and have be curious to hear, if we could connect in a month or even in a week, what has been birthed here by spending an hour together in collective rebellion, presence, honesty, authenticity. It's really beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you guys so much. You guys are all so amazing, and I this has been an amazing experience for me, even as a host. Um, I'm speechless with how amazing you all are, and the conversation we facilitated together, and we're able to draw out from each other and everything. So thank you guys so much for being on this episode.